everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Faith and Reason. I'm your host, Matt Slick. How are you doing this evening? It's a really nice Friday, at least here in Boise, Idaho. It is. I hope it's nice where you are, too. It's been a great week. I've been talking to a lot of atheists lately. We've had Bob the Atheist on last week. We had Wendy Britton on yesterday. We've got Kelly from the Rational Response Squad on right now. Kelly, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. And Kelly has been on a televised debate with Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron. I actually haven't seen it yet. That's kind of a embarrassing thing to admit. I should watch it, but I've been so busy and been doing so many different things. I just haven't gotten to it yet. So that's something I do need to get off my plate because it's on there to do. So at any rate.
No, that's okay, because when you see how bad their arguments are, your head would probably explode anyway.
Well, you never know. It's certainly possible that they didn't have some great arguments. I've heard some comments, and I'm going to reserve comments, but let's just say that I think different things could have been said, and I'll just be by Ray and Kirk. But yeah, I do know, I've talked to Kirk, and he's a great guy and loves the Lord, and folks, I just think I have a lot of respect for him. Anyway,
they're very nice people, but
Kirk's a great guy.
I mean, most of the Christians even who commented on the debate said, like, wow, their arguments were really bad and not scientific at all. So, yeah,
I like to use
displaying any kind of bravado.
Well, you know, I think I actually enjoy talking to atheists myself. I remember years ago when I first started talking to them, I was rather intimidated, and it didn't take very long for me to realize that, well, there's nothing to be intimidated about. And I don't mean that in any condescending, insulting way. It's just since I've been talking to atheists regularly, I enjoy it. I don't think that they, no offense meant, but I don't think they have very much of a leg to stand on, if you know what I mean. But nevertheless, so we can kind of get into that, I guess. We had talked a little bit about what to talk about tonight, and one of the things I was curious about is to ask what kind of an atheist you are. And there's strong atheists, weak atheists, agnostic-type atheists. Which are you?
Well, I consider myself to be an agnostic atheist.
Okay. At least that's intellectually honest.
I try my best to be intellectually honest at all times.
All right. So you're an agnostic atheist, which means that you are not convinced that God exists or does not exist.
Well, I'm atheist because I do not have a belief in God. I'm agnostic because the reason that I don't have belief in God is because there is no evidence to point to a belief in God or to, necessitate a belief in God. And that essentially, is the position. Some people may or may not claim to have knowledge of a particular supernatural being or not. I don't. There could very well be some supernatural being out there. I'm quite certain it's not the God of the Bible, but at any rate, I don't have all of the knowledge in the universe, and there could be evidence that comes up someday in the future that says that something does exist, but right now, there isn't.
Okay, well, you make an interesting statement, several of them, which I could jump right on into. I'll just do this first one. You said there is no evidence for God. How do you know that?
Well, there's no evidence of which I am aware or anybody that I know of short of personal experience. There is no direct material, physical evidence that cannot be explained better using science and natural scientific methodology to explain it.
Well, you see the category mistake you're making, though? I know you study philosophy. You should study the laws of logic. And the category mistake is an error made when you judge one thing out of its category. For example, if God does exist, and he's a creator of the universe, then he would not be a product of that universe, and therefore if you assume materialistic naturalism, that all things can be understood by this observing the universe, you would, by necessity, preclude the existence of God, and detectably. You couldn't detect him. And it's just not a logical thing to assume to begin with. You'd have to find a different criteria by which you could judge whether or not God exists.
Well, it is my belief that all things that would warrant any kind of logical evaluation are detectable by some means or methodology. So that right there is the reason why there is no evidence for this God, because, as you're saying, it's, this thing that's outside of nature, that's outside of science. So there's no reason to believe that it's there. You're making a logical leap. It's a non sequitur to say that this thing for which there's no evidence exists.
Well, I think it's to say that there is no evidence is illogical. You could not know all evidences or all things to know whether there is or is not. You could say, you could say of the evidence that you've seen, you've not been convinced. Okay, and that would be logically fair. You've just not been convinced by what you've seen. And that's
okay, then why don't you tell me what you consider to be some evidence for the existence of your particular God?
Well, I believe in the God of the Bible because of experience, which I would not use as a proof, but I've had an incredible experience of God's presence. I'm convinced also by the facts, by reason, by logic, and qualities in the Bible. But you said something about that would be detectable by, God needs to be detectable somehow by some methodology. Well, I love my wife, and I can tell you that, but how can I demonstrate that to you or prove it to you using a methodology? What would you accept? My word?
Well, actually, you can. Love is
it
something that you
quantifiable?
experience in response to certain chemicals and neurotransmitters being released in your brain.
Okay.
We can prove the existence of those chemicals and neurotransmitters. We can prove what areas of the brain that they affect. And we can also measure people while they're experiencing this emotional state called love to determine where the activity in their brain is occurring and what's causing it. So love, as the concept, this feeling, is still something that has its basis in a material object, which is your brain, and can be tested and studied scientifically.
How do you know that what I experience as love is the same as what you might or somebody else might? You wouldn't know.
Well, your particular experience of love may differ, okay? Just like your experience of the color blue might be slightly different from the way I perceive the color blue.
So there's no absolute way to determine this, is there?
It's like the studies that they've done on religion and God belief, where they do brain scans of people while they're in deep meditative states, or while they're praying, or while they're experiencing this phenomenon of the touch of the supernatural, if you want to say. And we can see that in all of those people, the same area of the brain is being stimulated. They're producing the same kinds of brain waves. And so you can make those kinds of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Conclusion.
You can come to the conclusion that that particular part of the brain and that particular chemical or neurotransmitter is what causes that experience.
How do you know it's the cause? How do you know it isn't a result of instead of a cause? See, what I'm trying to get at is there's a subjectivity.
The result of what? Everything's the result of something else.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that.
The result of what?
I would definitely agree with that. A good cosmological proof there. But, there are people who have different sensations that can be stimulated from the outside. For example, I see the color blue. There's going to be certain kinds of chemical reactions that occur in my brain. You could detect it. So it would be the result of something. And there are other things that will be the cause of something. I do know that, for example, I have a hearing deficiency. It's really kind of odd, and that when I have a tinnitus, and I've talked to some doctors about it, and there's certain kinds of tones and certain kinds of things that cause an auditory overload. And the solution is to put my finger in my ears. It's kind of immature and embarrassing sometimes, but that's what I got to do, and it's kind of common among men at my age. Well, that's an outside stimulus that causes a brain reaction. So it does not mean that because there's a chemical something going on that it's the cause of something. It could be the result of something. And so you don't know if there's a spiritual realm that we could be in tune with.
Yeah, okay. Your experience of a particular, like if you want to use emotions, is obviously caused in reaction to something which causes that part of your brain to be stimulated or causes you to release those neurotransmitters, kind of in the same way that like having an orgasm is, the cause of the release of oxytocin in the brain. Oxytocin is one of the hormones that's associated with the feeling of